All right, everybody, welcome, welcome. My name is Bianca Vasquez, and I will be getting us into the room today together. I am the program director here at Beloved Community Incubator, which is the organization hosting this Co-op 101. It's been really dope seeing in the chat people's like names, where you're from, the projects you're working on. And it's just really exciting to see people's excitement about really building a solidarity economy or building cooperatives where you are. Um, if you haven't updated your name, please do so. And I want to give a quick shout out to the other staffers from Beloved Community Incubator who are here. Kristen Kane, who's our Membership and Outreach Director. You'll hear from her later in the day. And Celeste, our Operations Director, who is running tech and sound and slides today. So please give both of them their flowers later in the run of show. So the first thing we wanted to do together is talk about what's the solidarity economy, because cooperatives fall into sort of a larger imagination of the solidarity economy. I am sorry, I'm off on slides. So I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about who BCI is before I talk about what the solidarity economy is, so y'all know about your host. So Beloved Community Incubator, we are a regional solidarity economy organization in the Washington, D.C. area, so serving Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C., as well as the near Maryland suburbs. Our organization, we came to be in the beginnings of it in 2016, after the presidential election. And we were listening to our neighbors. And as we listened to our neighbors, they talked about what they were most concerned about, what was causing the most stress in their lives were their workplaces. There was anxiety about low wages, about gentrification, about disparate immigration enforcement, as well as the desire and dreams to be like more present parents and more like active community members, and they wanted jobs that allowed for that. So our first foray into cooperative development and helping a group of people create their own workplace was really based on that listening we were doing in 2016 and 2017. Our mission is really to create living wage work through worker-owned businesses. And we have a focus on folks who are excluded from the traditional economy or the extractive economy for whatever reason: race, class, gender, disability, immigration status, and really wanting to create an economy that works for all of us. Our work in the DMV region is really nurturing an ecosystem where cooperatives can thrive. So that means we do a few different kinds of things, right? We offer legal and other technical support. We do trainings and webinars like this. We organize a network of cooperatives locally to help cooperatives and solidarity economy institutions relate to one another, but also to receive member benefits like trainings. And we offer non-extractive financing through the DC Solidarity Economy Loan Fund. And we're going to talk more about what's non-extractive financing, what's the loan fund, what does it take to be able to access a loan. So if any of you are in the place of you have a project that might need access to capital, stay tuned. We're going to talk about that at the end of our time. And I just really want to encourage everybody two things. Like, as you are hearing things today, feel free to put things in the chat. We're going to be collecting questions for the end of our time today. So if something strikes you in the moment, please put your question in the chat and we'll be gathering them. So great, thank you. I'm going to move us to what is a solidarity economy, because our work building collectively owned businesses or worker cooperatives really sits in this larger imagination of the solidarity economy. And solidarity economy is a global movement But it's really this idea, or built upon this idea, that we can prioritize people and the planet over endless growth and endless profit. And one of the things that we know is that racialized capitalism and destruction of the planet are rooted in the same thing, which is extraction. Um, and so the solidarity economy is a framework that's organized around building real alternatives to capitalism, where there's community ownership and community control of resources, and the resources we need for life, and really building upon that a culture of solidarity and respect for the earth. We are members at BCI of the New Economy Coalition, which is a national organization of groups that are working together to bring the solidarity economy, especially like shifting away from fossil fuels, into fruition in the United States here. So you probably, if you're coming from a different place in the country than the DMV, have other New Economy Coalition members that are here today with us. I am going to shift us to just talk about like what are cooperatives, because we're going to be talking specifically about what are cooperatives today. And so broadly speaking, there's a lot of different types of cooperatives. So a lot of people are familiar with cooperatives that are larger. So, for example, a lot of people are familiar with credit unions, right? Credit unions are a cooperative because they meet the two criteria, right? It is owned by its members, governed by its members, and the who receives financial benefit is its members. So if we take that formula, you can apply that to housing. Washington, D.C. has the largest number of housing cooperatives in the United States outside of New York City. And so, what happens when tenants are owners of their building, right? We see more rent control, we see less displacement. But what makes it a cooperative is the people who live there, own it, govern it, and benefit from it financially. So there's a lot of different types of cooperatives. So we have credit unions, we have housing cooperatives, we have consumer cooperatives, which is another kind of cooperative that people are more familiar with, which is like grocery stores, where you can become a member of a grocery store, and becoming a member makes you eligible to be on the board. And the grocery store then exists for the benefit of its members. The smallest percentage of cooperatives in the US is worker cooperatives. And worker cooperatives are where the workers in a business are actually the people who manage the business and receive the financial benefit of the business. And why this is really distinct, I would say, is a lot of us are accustomed to a framework of capitalism where there are a very small number of owners and a large number of workers. And the idea of business is you're incentivized to pay workers as little as possible to create a large surplus that is then taken out of community. We really love worker cooperatives because the inherent idea is that the people who create surplus or create the value of the business get to benefit from the business. And that has a ton of benefits that we'll review sort of after we talk about some history of co-ops in our region. But that is really why BCI focuses on worker co-ops, although we do support a number of consumer cooperatives, purchasing cooperatives, and housing cooperatives. I want to highlight one of our partner organizations that is a purchasing cooperative in our region called Community Purchasing Alliance. And this is bringing together schools, houses of worship, and some apartment buildings to do collective purchasing. So everything from electric to food service and janitorial. right? And we're excited about this because as we link together worker cooperatives and purchasing cooperatives, we can keep money in our communities while providing essential services and quality jobs. And again, I really encourage everybody to ask lots of questions. But we have a special guest with us tonight, Professor Renee Hatcher. And she's going to talk about sort of the history of co-ops, like what's the legacy we sit within as we're thinking about creating new businesses or doing collective economic projects together. Professor Hatcher's bio could be really long, but she is an amazing cooperative attorney and solidarity economy organizer, who is the director of the Community Enterprise and Solidarity Economy Law Clinic in Chicago. She is spending a year at the George Washington Community Economic Development Clinic, and has significant experience in organizing and providing legal support to worker cooperatives, really with the imagination and commitment to building worker power and community power. So I am going to pass Professor Hatcher the mic, and you all will get to hear from her, and hopefully we'll have enough time to ask some questions.
Thanks so much, Bianca. I'm really grateful to be here. I haven't been in DC long, but really excited to share some of the history with folks and also hopefully have some time just to have some conversation about what all this means as folks think about building new co-ops here in DC. So if we could cue up the slides, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to be brief. We'll see how it goes. But really just to give an overview of the history of cooperatives and cooperative development in DC. One of the things that's really exciting about this work in DC is just the rich history of cooperatives. And so want to maybe preface all this with saying, there's probably no way that I could cover the full history, but wanted to at least elevate some of the main things that I think are really, really encouraging and inspiring about co-op development, solidarity economy in DC, and also just the context in which all this is happening in DC. And so similar to co-op development in other places, DC has seen periods of a lot of activity around cooperative development. And one of the ways we can think about that is that those periods tend to be moments of crisis, moments when racial capitalism is in crisis. And as we see, like in other cities around the country, DC kind of follows that pattern of cooperative development, but has a long, rich history that stretches back to 1880 with the Rochdale Cooperative Society, which essentially was a consumer cooperative that had over 6,000 members. But generally speaking, the height of cooperative development and organizing, we can kind of organize by these three periods historically. The rise in cooperative development during the Great Depression and the years that followed, folks obviously used co-ops or turned to co-ops to try to address their material needs in different ways. During the civil rights era, we see also a surge of co-ops and different types of co-ops, most of which are connected to other types of organizing movements. Here in DC, I'm excited to talk a little bit about the work of the Berry administration to really encourage cooperative development, what the vision, I think, of that administration was around cooperative development that wasn't necessarily fulfilled, but also I think made a lot of headway in terms of the co-ops that exist here in DC, an important part of the local history for cooperative development and solidarity economy. And then, cooperatives today, certainly, I think we all probably can attest to the surge of mutual aid organizing, co-op development in the wake of the pandemic, but also have seen a rise of worker co-op development in the last decade that I think has made a big difference, but also a reflection of what we know is happening in the larger economy. So I see cooperatives as tools of resistance and cultural practice. A lot of times when folks are talking about co-ops, they'll start with the Rochdale principles that come from England and the weavers that started a co-op, I think, in 1844. But one of the things that I think is important to always name is that cooperative practices um, were practiced across the globe, especially in indigenous communities and African communal societies, that beyond any formalizing of a cooperative, that these types of practices are often more aligned with folks' indigenous and cultural practices for communities of color, for Black folks, in looking back to how we organized society on the continent before colonialism. And so just wanted to name that in terms of the origin and history of cooperativism. Um, and if we can go to the next slide. So then just looking at some of the early cooperative efforts in DC, a number of cooperatives kind of sprung up in the wake of the Great Depression, addressing different things around the crisis. And so the federal government passed a legislation that in part gave some money to cities around emergency relief. DC essentially sets up the Emergency Relief Administration for the district, and that agency gives grants and other types of fundings to cooperative efforts and also mutual aid societies. Um, we also see a lot of organizing of worker co-ops by the Knights of Labor. That was not just in DC, but in cities around the country, really just as labor organizing developed, folks started to create cooperatives as a direct way in which workers could own their labor. But many of the cooperative efforts, one of the things that I really love about DC, like many of the cooperative efforts during the Great Depression were actually aimed at making things and then for the members of that specific cooperative. And so they essentially were bypassing the market and really making sure that people directly got what they needed. By joining a cooperative, folks would be able to farm produce, they would be able to make like basic goods that folks need. And those goods were provided directly to the members of the cooperatives. And then any surplus often were bartered with other cooperatives that existed around DC. And so I think that's really kind of amazing when you think about it. But one of the special things about some of the collective collection and network of cooperatives in DC in the wake of the Great Depression. At this time, we're also seeing co-ops that are Black-led, that are directly addressing discrimination, which I think is part of a number of co-ops, both historically and currently in DC and around the country, but Black-led cooperatives that were developing really to provide a service or a good that was just not made available to Black folks because of discrimination. So cooperatives like the Capitol Cab Cooperative that was established in 1934 was really just created so that Black folks could actually have access to transportation as they weren't allowed to ride in white-owned taxis. And so we see a lot of instances in which co-ops are really created by a community that's discriminated against or oppressed to address their direct needs and to also control, right, the access to that good or service. Can we go to the next slide? I have to mention Nannie Helen Burroughs, who is really a pioneer of DC cooperative development. She organized a number of different initiatives here to support the Black community, including a school to ensure that Black women could be educated. But in the 30s, drawing inspiration from the Rochdale Cooperative Society in DC, she started the Northeast Self-Help Cooperative. She co-founded it with another Black woman. And it eventually becomes, or it's referred to as the Cooperative Industries of Washington, D.C. It had many different types of cooperatives. In terms of manufacturing, it had a farm. They were making different types of goods. And again, this was one of those initiatives in which members had direct access to the things that they were making and creating, also bartering, but finding ways to do job development, finding ways to for folks to directly access the goods and the things that they needed, and then connecting that like to a larger supports and community supports through the cooperative. And so the Cooperative Industries of Washington, D.C. is like one of the, I think, key first co-ops that we start to see in the 30s. And certainly made a big difference in terms of what things look like in those years. Can we go to the next slide? And then I think the other thing, one of the things I wanted to name was just that in many instances that co-op development is directly connected to a larger organizing movement, some of which are radical movements that were here in DC. And so one example that I really was drawn to was the Washington Area Feminist Credit Union, which was developed by the National Black Feminist Organization. Is an organization that started in the 70s, essentially really to name the interest of Black feminists in the feminist movement, and then also in the larger movement at the time. But essentially, they start to organize the credit union in part to help women secure women's economic independence, and it becomes one part of their larger strategy, right, to further feminist liberation, Black liberation in terms of their work. And so there are many, many, many different examples in which we see co-ops being directly connected to larger organizing movements. Sometimes that's tenant organizing, sometimes that's worker organizing or labor organizing. But there's many various examples here in DC in which there was an organization that was in part driving the development of the co-op. And I think that's also one of the ways in which we see co-ops being developed today by a supporting incubator organization that is a part of a larger movement. Can we go to the next slide? So then looking at some of the co-ops that started to develop in the 60s and 70s, we see a number of food co-ops. Again, this is a time of a lot of political activism and organizing and mobilization. We also see a lot of organizing that's happening at public housing developments. So at the time, there were a number of food co-ops that developed and were based at public housing developments around the city. The first of which is pictured here, which is the Martin Luther King Jr. Food Co-op that started in 1970. But again, with the wave of political organizing, it's also a time where co-ops are starting to develop in various industries, in different types of co-ops. I know I might focus on worker co-ops. We'll talk a little bit about housing co-ops here in DC. But I think one of the really amazing things about DC in particular is that from the beginning of cooperative development, there was a range of different types of co-ops, some of which were focused on worker ownership and worker governance, some of which were focused on consumer ownership, and also a lot of manufacturing and producer co-ops. And so there was certainly a range of co-ops in DC in the early history. So we can go to the next slide. And through this period in the 70s, I mean, I think certainly Marion Barry, the previous mayor of DC, was likely inspired by some of the organizing that took place in DC in the 60s and 70s. He's also, was very active and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, but also, largely involved in the Black Freedom Movement. But in terms of the Berry administration, we see a larger vision really for cooperative development. And it's often attributed to One of his advisors, Cornelius Givens, sometimes called Cornbread Givens, but he had a vision essentially to fully integrate, right, a cooperative economy. And so thinking about how you could use worker co-ops and housing co-ops and service co-ops in furtherance of really building a resilient local economy that people actually had a vested stake in, that people actually had ownership in, that they had control over. And so in the 1980, we see the creation of the DC Commission for Cooperative Economic Development. It's essentially becomes a permanent agency within the mayor's office. And essentially its mission is to enact this vision. At the time, there were also a number of initiatives that were passed. We'll talk about the uh, tenant organizing or tenant opportunity to purchase act that was also passed in 1980. But essentially the commission was didn't fully wasn't fully able to enact its vision for a number of different reasons. Um, but it ultimately was working to incorporate like the infrastructure at the city level to actually support widespread cooperative development in a methodic and kind of integrated way. And one of the only cities I would say that to ever kind of express the vision, create this type of agency, even if it wasn't fulfilled. So we can go to the next slide. I think the legacy of the commission also was the passage of the TOPA Act, essentially, which is the Tenants Opportunity to Purchase Act, and the rise of housing co-ops in the 1980s. So as I mentioned, in 1980, DC passed essentially what is the first ordinance that allows for tenants to have a right of first refusal to purchase their building when their landlord goes to sell. Um, and in the years after 1980, the city of DC also provided a lot of support to community organizations to help tenants organize, to purchase their building. There were other types of access to financing to create housing co-ops or to buy out landlords and eventually turn those over to housing co-ops. Um, but what we see is a rise of limited equity housing co-ops, many of which still exist in DC today. I think at their height, there were somewhere between 80 and 90. I think at least in terms of, according to the last city report, there's somewhere around 60 limited equity housing co-ops here in the city that are still providing much needed affordable housing. But I think the key point being that before 1980, there were 9 limited equity housing cooperatives that existed in DC. In the intervening years, we saw a flurry of co-ops in the 90s, and again, many of which are still around today. And happy to talk more about all of that. And also just want to mention that, that some of this is still being contested. We know that the mayor recently also has introduced an act that would actually roll back TOPA in some cases for some buildings. And so um, the other thing I want to mention, with the Berry administration, it definitely wasn't something that was just coming from the city. There was so much organizing, the in DC, residents and organizations fighting for home rule in DC at the time, a lot of organizing happening to get affordable housing and to get cooperative limited equity housing cooperatives to actually get TOPA passed. And so all of this is happening in a certain context and time where folks are fighting to gain power, to actually provide for cooperatives and institutions that are going to serve their material needs in a way. Can we go to the next slide? So some of the key things that I'll pull out from the past and would love also, to the extent that others want to chime in with other parts of the history or more contemporary parts of the history, would love to take some time to do that. But one of some of the things that I pull out in terms of the lessons learned is that co-ops succeed when they're deeply rooted in community. I think that there's so many examples of cooperatives that really were coming from community based off of either direct material needs or connected to community organizations that folks were building. Um, and then the importance to capture our experience and lessons from cooperative organizing. And so while DC has had uh, many cooperatives. A number of them don't exist today, right? And that's not to say that they failed, but that they are opportunities to learn from them. And so I think as we try to develop cooperatives or as we operate cooperatives, I think it's really important to find ways and opportunities to really memorialize our history, our experience, our lessons learned. Um, because there are many instances in which, places that flourish with a cooperative ecosystem, with a solidarity economy ecosystem, it's never that everything goes right the first time. A lot of it is usually that there are individuals and there are organizations that are trying to develop cooperatives or are learning from the development of cooperatives and then going on to start new ones, learning from those previous experiences. And so one of the things I think that we can do is really just both share our experiences with each other, but also as we develop and build and operate co-ops, find ways to actually memorialize like some of our experiences, the history, and the lessons learned from those specific co-ops, even if they don't ultimately continue to operate. Um, Certainly, I think we're seeing a resurgence of co-ops here in DC, organizations like BCI and the organizing that they've been doing and others. And I think, more or less like we're in one of those moments of crisis. And so there certainly has been a resurgence of both interest and also organizing around co-ops. Seeing new housing co-ops like Baldwin House that recently got started, a number of more recent worker and food co-ops. And so I think that's really encouraging. And then finally, I think that co-ops, one of the things I really appreciate about the work that BCI does is like thinking about how do we integrate this work as an ecosystem? How do we make each other stronger? How can we actually develop deeper relationships so co-ops can actually provide support to each other, but also again, like learning lessons from each other. Um, and more or less like how does that connect to, our larger vision for what we want and what we're fighting for in the world that's possible. And so that's most of what I wanted to get through. I'd be happy if folks have things to add or questions. I would love to spend some time on that.
Hi, Renee. We had a question in the chat earlier about Black women-led co-ops, and I know you highlighted Nanny Helen Burroughs, but if you had any other examples from the past, that would be wonderful to share.
Mm-hmm. Well, so a number of the housing co-ops really were organized by Black women. Linda Leaks, who is a member of the Ella Jo Baker co-op, also helped that co-op to form and organize. Was more or less like one of the main organizers for a number of the housing co-ops here in DC. Uh, I think I already mentioned the DC feminist credit union. So there were a number of different types of co-ops. But there was a rich history and tradition of Black feminist organizing in DC that was touching, I would say, housing co-ops, also in some cases, the worker co-ops. Um, and, one of the resources I might also point folks to is to Collective Courage. If you haven't had a chance to read it, definitely I'd suggest that. So it's by Jessica Gordon Nimhard, who also I think is a part-time resident of DC, but details the history of Black cooperativism in the US and has many examples of Black women-led co-ops in DC and around the country.
I have more of a like personal question for you and curiosity of like what led you to this work? Why are you doing this?
Oh, that's a long story. So no, I'm doing this because I mean, I'm committed to Black liberation and liberation of all people. And what I know is that capitalism will never work for the majority of people in this country, and certainly not the communities that I care about. And so, once I got to that place, I was like, well, what can we do about it? And so, more or less, like that's why I use, the framework of solidarity economy um, for the work that I hope to support. But then also from my direct experience growing up in Gary, Indiana, which in some ways was an abandoned, ravaged city by racial capitalism, essentially a city that was born out of U.S. Steel and kind of lived and died with U.S. Steel in so many instances. And so trying to make sense as to how can a city be abandoned? And also trying to understand like organized abandonment. Both in terms of commercial activity, but also just in terms of white flight. And so the racial aspects and and the way in which spatial racism often plays out. And so thinking about, how can communities that are often in those positions, how can we create institutions that we own and control that actually serve us? And so, that's more or less how I come to the work and I think why this work is important. Any other questions?
Hi, I have a question.
Mhm.
So I'm a speech therapist, and I have always thought about organizing like a workers' co-op with other therapists, but don't really have a vision for how possible that is. Just wondering if you've seen any workers' co-ops of healthcare workers or sort of direct service providers like that.
Yeah, definitely have seen some co-ops that are providing those types of services. I think one of the considerations that sometimes comes up with that is that there are sometimes like state regulations about who can actually be a part of those types of businesses, right? So sometimes there's certifications that all of the owners might need in a particular state. Um, specific to the type of service that's being provided and the specific service within the medical industry, but absolutely have seen examples of that type of worker co-op.
Cool, thank you.
Great. And then, so what I might say, just for my part, I will follow up just with some additional, maybe reading material in case folks are interested. There's a lot of really great resources here in DC. Folks have created a directory, both of present and past co-ops that might be a little bit outdated, but really fascinating just to, if you want to learn more about the history of cooperatives in DC. Um, and then also maybe some additional, just a few of the sources I mentioned, Collective Courage. The University of Wisconsin recently did a really great report on Latinx co-ops in the US that has a lot of good information if folks are interested. But yeah, I'll turn it back. Or I
Professor
think
Hatcher, before you move on, there is a hand up. Mel, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, so I just had a quick general question, just looking for a bit of advice. So I'm like super new to this. I'm a relatively new grad. I graduated about 2 years ago. And I've been trying to figure out what I want to do since. And I'm kind of just trying to work part-time right now and living at home. And I grow my mushrooms and carnivorous plants, and I applied for a one-person LLC. But eventually, like once I get that set up and I've been selling like just like my plants by myself for a while, I really wanted to like start like a gourmet mushroom growing operation. And for that, I can't do that in my house that I live in like I can with the plants. Like, and I would need like at least one person to help me. Like, how do you even like
Mhm.
find a location to set up shop. And like, I
Mm.
guess I need to ask people who grow mushrooms, like where you find a space for something that specific, I guess. But most of all, like those are specific industry questions, but what I kind of need from y'all is like, where am I even supposed to look for people that are like reliable and passionate and interested in this? And like I've put a lot of my own effort and time into this. And like I have a weird combination of both being self-sacrificing and like maybe also a little bit like controlling because I love it so much. And so it's just like, all right, how do I find people who can trust, but who also have like good ideas and like want to like, because I don't want to call all the shots and be people's boss, because other people have great ideas and I want to be collaborative. But like, yeah, I don't know, like how do I even like find like partners who
Mhm.
would even want that, and like how do like what like how do people like buy into a co-op, because like I've invested a lot of time and money, and like I guess
Mm.
other members would need to do some kind of buy-in,
Yeah.
or something. I don't know, sorry, I'm rambling now, but yeah.
No, those are all great questions. I think, one of the ways in which you find folks who are interested is actually coming to events like this. Like, BCI does Solidarity Economy happy hours. But a number of co-ops, I didn't mention this, but a number of co-ops actually just start from study groups, folks that are interested to learn more about co-ops, and then eventually from those study groups actually either launch a co-op. I think also what you're describing, Mel, is a one way in which co-ops often get started. It's like sometimes there's a founder who starts a business and then recruits folks to join them as co-op members or worker owners. And so in some of the specifics, it really just depends in terms of what buy-in looks like. I mean, that can depend on so many things in terms of how you want to structure it. But I would say like the first steps would be to really like join community and organizations that are talking about co-ops like, BCI. Um, and yeah, I don't know if other folks would add to that.
I think some of the technical questions around like how do you get started, how do you find space, things like that, some of that's going to come up in our next section. So hopefully that can support you, but also welcome other people to answer that.
Yeah, I think I put this in the chat and I think we can add it. I think there's a pretty robust actually like local um farm infrastructure and food co-op like pipeline that's getting built. Um, you know, I just want to highlight like the Glut is one of the oldest worker co-ops in the US. It's in Mount Rainier and is a food cooperative. We have the Tacoma Park Silver Spring Food Cooperative. There are multiple local farm cooperatives that are local, and even a farm infrastructure co-op that's in Southern PG County, Earthbound Building. So there's like a ton of people to get connected to in that in that realm as well, of people who are also looking to do it. So it's also people who would know someone, maybe they have someone who's excited about the same thing. So I just echo everything Renee said as well. And I think things like this of kind of industry specific, as well as then like cooperative or solidarity economy specific, and you'll find overlap there for sure. If you have time, I do have one more question for you. So I know you're visiting in DC, and coming from the Chicagoland area. Um, I'm wondering if you can sort of speak to like examples of cooperatives that inspire you in Chicago, or
Mhm.
examples of like kind of ecosystem victories or co-ops working together. Anything you can talk about from that part of your work, especially since we have a lot of folks on the call today, that DC is not their only like vantage point.
Yeah, I would love to. So yeah, there's a lot of really amazing co-ops in Chicago. I would say also that, Most of my work in Chicago has been with worker co-ops, also, some housing co-ops, community land trusts. Um, and co-ops like Cooperatives, which is a newer co-op that's based on the South Side. It's a collective of artists that also now have a space to do their art, not only for things like a gallery space, but also to be able to create art in terms of equipment. And so they've been working to build out essentially their art space, and then intend to invite new members in to also be able to access, like some of the common things that artists might need. Co-ops like Shy Fresh, which is a food catering co-op, also on Chicago's South Side, owned by Black women, all who have been impacted by the criminal legal system, who are returning citizens, but now, have access to meaningful work. And one of the things that they're working on right now that I think is really exciting is that they're actually within that co-op developing a housing co-op because of the real need for housing and access to housing specifically for folks who have a criminal legal record. And so they're taking the additional step to develop a housing co-op. Um, and, there's also a recent worker co-op called Healing for Change that is really doing some of the deep kind of both interorganizational and also individual healing work, I think both with cooperatives and also within our ecosystem. And so they're doing some really, I think, important and amazing work to deal with the way in which like these systems of oppression actually come into the room with us, whether we intend for them to or not. And so one of the things I think that sometimes is challenging when worker co-ops develop is just simply um, shedding ourselves of the roles that we're used to playing, and also the way in which we're the norms that we're used to within the mainstream economy or within racial capitalism. And so sometimes that brings up things that we need to also just address and heal from. And so that's, I think, part of the work that they're trying to do actually with their worker co-op. And yeah, and so in Chicago, I would say it's been good. We've been trying to develop or build out the ecosystem in different ways. We've at different times developed coalitions and campaigns around law reform items. And I think more recently, really trying to create more kind of like peer-to-peer opportunities for co-ops to learn from co-ops. There's a number of examples where folks are talking about co-locating or buying a building together and trying to think about just how can cooperatives cooperate with each other in ways that actually strengthen each other.
I have a question to piggyback on what you just said, Renee.
Mhm.
Hello, beloved community. First of all, I am a bookseller, a retailer, and I'm interested in cooperative purchase of a commercial building.
Mhm.
Give me your opinion on, first of all, whether it's feasible or not, and whether cooperative purchasing of commercial space actually works as a sustainable machine.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think it works. There are different models. There's many, many, many different models. And it depends on what that looks like. So there's a couple of projects that I've been involved with or help support that are more about co-location, but more so like office space as opposed to retail space. I think a lot of that, sometimes that's who's going to steward the building, how's this building going to be stewarded together, what's it going to look like in terms of purchase and financing of the building. There's a lot of different models and examples. One I would say that might be useful only because they've written a lot about their experience is E.G. Wood. It's it's a pretty large commercial space that got rehabbed, I would say maybe like last year. I think it just opened last year. But it's owned by the business owners within the building. maybe one or two of which are co-ops, the majority of which are just small business owners, but they do collectively own and also make decisions about the building. There's a number of different examples that people are now developing, similar to, I think, what you're describing. They can look different. Sometimes they're using more of a community investment model as opposed to a cooperative or commercial cooperative model. I mean, the difference with that is that community investment vehicles sometimes allow for individual residents to have some ownership or equity stake in it. They're different. Again, there's like many different models depending on what you're trying to accomplish. But what I would say is that absolutely possible. And I think one of the first steps you would want to do is just kind of think about who your organizational or cooperative partners would be in terms of owning, stewarding the building.
Okay, and would you repeat the letters of the community EG? Is it E as an elephant, G, Gorgeous, Jeffrey, Wood?
Yep, E.G. Wood.
Okay.
E.G. Wood. And it stands for Inglewood because it's based in Inglewood in Chicago. But yeah, you'll find both. I'm happy to follow up with this, but they wrote basically a community investment vehicle playbook that in part describes the model and how they went about it. And I think it includes information about the way in which they finance the building and the way in which decision making and ownership works. So that could be just useful to see that as a helpful case model.
Excellent, excellent. I happen to live in a limited equity cooperative. I won't comment on that, but I also follow the progression of Baldwin House. And I just like to add that as a bookseller, I volunteered to set up their little free library there as part of the community support. I do too.
Cooperation amongst cooperatives.
That's it. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And just a shout out, Baldwin House is a member of BCI's network of cooperatives. And the mechanism by which Baldwin House was able to raise some of the equity to buy the building, our colleague in law, who's not here right now, Jeff Gilbert, who's on staff at BCI, helped create like a community mortgage program for them to be able to raise some of that money. And so now they're going to be helping other buildings like utilize that same mechanism. So it's really exciting, I think, what's happening in DC. Very cool to hear you're also connected to the project, and just really look forward to like how we can get connected with you to see if there are ways to support you in this cooperative process, and also keep you connected to this like larger burgeoning ecosystem.
Thank you. I already DM'd Renee, and so I will slide into the hands of BCI right now. Thanks.
Perfect. Well, Professor Hatcher, we want to thank you deeply for your time and all of what you gave us tonight. There was a request for your slide decks, and so we wanted to first receive permission to share that. If that's possible, then we will share with the people that are here tonight.
Of course, absolutely. And I'm just dropping my email in case folks want to follow up or have questions. Would love to be connected.
Thank you. Thank you for casting vision by giving us history. I think that's just so beautiful. And I know that you have to run to another engagement, so thank you for your time.
Thanks so much. Everybody take good care.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. So, and thank you everybody for being so engaged.
Kristen, you went on mute.
I got muted by Celeste. I was just saying that thank you everybody so much for participating in the chat. It's been really wonderful to have that connection and to see that people are really eager to be building the solidarity economy we're talking about. So my name is Kristen Kane. I am the Director of Outreach and Network with BCI. And I wanted to also just shout out one more time our colleague Celeste Smith, who has been running all of the tech tonight. So shout out to her in this space. All right, so we want to move on to talking a little bit more about the benefits of worker co-op specifically, and just to cast what the rest of this evening is going to look like, especially for people that are local in the DMV. We're going to talk about benefits, and then we're going to move into like the BCI network. What are the benefits of that? And then how do you actually get the support that BCI can offer? So that's going to be the next section of our time together. And then there'll be a little more time at the end for continued conversation and questions. So keep the questions firing. I'm not going to pay attention to the chat. I'm going to ask my colleagues to pay attention to that. So if anybody needs to stop me, just unmute yourself and yell at me. And all right. So as far as the benefits of worker co-ops, we talk about how it really helps supports to build community wealth and also to combat inequity. One of the ways that that happens is that worker co-ops are a true alternative for people that are excluded from the traditional or the racialized capitalized economy. So for example, people with mixed immigration status can actually be worker owners within cooperatives, people that have that are immigrants here, people that have records, people that are excluded for any kind of ways within the traditional economy. Worker co-ops are a great way to actually insert themselves into the economy, both at a financial benefit, but also in making decisions, which moves us really into seeing that worker co-ops create not only quality jobs, but jobs that have longevity for their workers, worker owners, and often provide extensive skills sets that not only allow people to be successful in the business that they run, but also to translate that into their lives. And the wages are better than traditionally those same jobs within the traditional economy. So thinking about, for example, a cooperative that I'm going to talk about a little bit more within this time is Swamp Rose, which is a you don't have to switch that quite yet. Appreciate you though. Thank you, Celeste. Swamp Rose, which I'll be talking about a little bit more in a second. They do, oh my gosh, it just completely slipped my mind. What do they do? They do, help me. Why did that just go out my brain, Bianca?
Swamp Rose is a
Thank you.
local cooperative that does
Landscaping.
Landscaping, the word
Maybe
landscaping.
camp landscaping.
That's all I needed. Thank you. Thank you. My brain went to Spanish and it just went, yeah, it was a problem. Anyway, so they're a local landscaping cooperative that we work deeply with, and they have been able to increase their wages something to like $32 an hour, where traditionally it's less than $20 an hour for landscapers. So just to give an idea of the actual wealth that people are able to experience with the same kind of industry, but with a worker-owned cooperative. Additionally, a beautiful things, we started to hear this within some of the chatting that was happening, is that one of the tenets of cooperatives is cooperation amongst cooperatives. And so as we are able to build our ecosystem within the DMV, we can start to see cooperatives actually supporting each other. So let's say that there is a coffee shop that opens, and then there's a coffee supplier co-op being able to buy the coffee from that coffee supplier co-op. So actually money gets invested within the cooperative ecosystem and really truly stays within the local economy. So those are just some of the ways in which worker co-ops provide benefits. I would also say, you can move to the next slide, but I would also say, as a person that's also part of a worker co-op, it creates not only access to better wages, but also like the dignity of having say over your workplace and your environment. And so that's like something that I have really seen as beautiful. So I want to just switch gears real quick and talk about the BCI network. We have 20 plus member organizations within the network here within the DMV. And some of the logos here are present. We'll talk some more about some specific ones, but want to talk about what the benefit of the BCI network is. Might be premature for some of you online in that you might not yet have a worker cooperative or a cooperative, but want to just give some imagination of what we do offer as people transition to being part of cooperatives. So within the BCI network, we provide legal hours. So if you're a member of the network, you get 6 legal hours to support your cooperative. You also get 6 hours of cooperative development. So whether it be supporting you within your governance, maybe some financial issues, maybe you need a new chart of account, all different kinds of access to cooperative development. Yes, so currently the BCI network is exclusively to the DMV. I see that in the chat. But we can connect. Well, and in the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about our national-wide organization that we're part of. That maybe wherever you are, there's also a local peer. We also provide $1,000 in continued ed investment within the cooperative, and people can actually access that depending on what kind of continued ed they might need within their own cooperative. It could be something around they need the space to be able to do a retreat to make sure that their cooperative is still caring for the people part of things. It could be that maybe there's a very specific skill that would help that cooperative, and so they can access that. And we also then support in capital access and loan readiness. So that's what the benefits are. And then what I love is that we also have expectations of the network members. And one of the primary expectations is that cooperatives do solidarity exchanges to help really weave together the network of cooperatives, and to also say that like peer-to-peer learning is some of the best learning we can make happen within the space. And then finally, we see the BCI network as building a power, right? We're not only building worker cooperatives for individual, but how can we continue to shift the power dynamic in our larger ecosystem? And so coming together to see ways we could also do bigger campaigns. All right, we can move on. Thank you, Celeste. I'm gonna wait to the end for some of the questions and ask Bianca and Celeste to just track some of those questions, please. All right, so we've talked about the benefits of cooperatives. We're talking about cooperatives, like how do we actually finance it and how do we build it? So I'm going to first talk about the finance arm of how we are supporting worker co-ops and cooperatives here in the DMV. And this is the place, this is actually the place where there's also a national network. So DC Solidarity Economy Loan Fund, or DC SELF that we call it, is our local chapter of a bigger loan fund called Seed Commons. And it's really a cooperative, so a wealth building cooperative. And there's 25 plus what we call peer funds across the nation. So that's where, if you put where you are in the chat, Bianca, I see is giving people connections to their local peer fund, which also have networks similar to us. So Seed Commons is a national community wealth building cooperative. What we do is it's a network of non-extractive loan funds. I'm going to explain what non-extractive loans mean in a minute. And really what we're doing is like, how do we organize our money nationally to make a bigger impact within our community? And so far, over $100 million have been invested nationally since 2011. And in 100 plus non-extractive loans. So again, in our region, it's called DC SELF. And I want to talk a little bit about what exactly is non-extractive lending. So first off, when a cooperative applies for a loan within DC SELF, and I'm going to specifically talk about DC SELF, in that process, there is no personal guarantees that are put on the table or collateral when it comes to personal finances. So often people, if you've ever had to get a loan out or try to apply for a loan, you have to have personal assets that you can put online in order to get access to traditional loans. That's not true within Seed Commons or DC SELF loans, no personal guarantees. And so even if your business fails and you can't pay back the loan, none of your personal assets are going to come after, which is a huge shift in power dynamics when it comes to lending. Also, the rate of the loan is 8% simple interest. I'm going to talk a little bit more about like how that like translates, but it's not a compounding interest. And also, a cooperative does not have to pay back on their loan until they're profitable. So it really gives an opportunity for capital to really lift up and solidify the business before it then has to start paying back and affecting its bottom line. Additionally, if a cooperative starts paying back their loan because they're profiting and something happens in which they no longer profiting for a month, there is no consequence to not making a payment. And there's no fines for not making a payment. Also, there's no consequence for paying back your loan early. So really what I'm trying to express is the benefit of non-extractive lending for cooperatives and individuals, and how distinctive it is to traditional loans, let alone even having access to capital. Most of the loans that we provide, the people that are receiving the loans would not have access to traditional lending institutions. So I'm going to talk about three of our three just like local loans that are, I think, good examples. So the first one is Dulce Hogar, which is the first collective cooperative that BCI incubated. It is a worker-owned cleaning cooperative. And the reason why I want to share about this particular loan is because I think it expresses the like 8% simple interest very well. It was a $10,000 loan. They got to be able to purchase some new vacuums, materials they needed, and to really like take their business to the next professional level. And they took them 2 years to pay back the loan, and the total interest that they paid on that loan was $800. So no more. The entire of 2 years was a total of $800. So like if anybody even has a credit card or has experienced any other kind of loans, like that's just unheard of to only have to pay $800 in interest off of a $10,000 loan. Second of all, I want to talk about Swamp Rose Cooperative, the landscaping cooperative, which is an ecologically friendly landscaping cooperative that's really looking at how to do rainwater mitigation, how to be planet friendly and people friendly by every aspect of what they do. Swamp Rose is another great connection for the person. It wasn't Kim, it was Mel that was talking about the mushrooms. They probably have some good contacts to connect with too. Also, Owl Nest Farm in northern Upper Marlboro. So there are other like farming and eco-friendly co-ops that do already exist in our ecosystem as well that I think could be some good context. But that's besides the point. What I'm trying to talk about is the lending aspect of things. So Swamp Rose, they were a 7-person worker-owned cooperative, really decidedly created this cooperative as a way to insert themselves into a traditionally extractive industry. So landscaping is like historically nationwide, incredibly extractive to the workers, very profitable to the owner, and very extractive to the workers. And one of the things that I missed when we were talking about the benefits of cooperatives, when it comes to community wealth, it's like, as Bianca was sharing, in the traditional economy, it's like, how can the singular owners make as much money possible at the most exploitation of the workers? And as a worker cooperative, it's really like, how do you do profit sharing? And so that's a huge benefit to a worker ownership, is the profit sharing piece of it. Anyways, Swamp Rose folks decidedly wanted to create a cooperative because they had the values of cooperative. They had been politically formed in that direction and had desires to care for the ecosystem, or ecologically for the planet Earth, and came together and inserted themselves into the industry of landscaping. And they were at a place where, again, they had 7 worker owners and they were all part-time. But people had the desire to go full-time, but they were in a catch-22 about not having the capital necessary to purchase an additional truck. Additional truck would allow them to do more jobs. They had only 1 truck and they needed 2 trucks to be able to do more jobs. Being able to have more jobs would allow them to then have at least 2 people go full-time. So they were able to pull down a $50,000 loan to be able to purchase additional truck and some other materials that they need. And within the first month of that investment in purchasing the truck and having that loan, they were able to go from not only 2 people full-time, but to 4 people full-time. So I just want to express like how quote unquote little bit of capital, not little for a lot of people, but $50,000 can then move a cooperative to having 4 full-time living wage jobs. So that is the power of this non-extractive lending. And then just the last one I want to shout out, because it's our most recent one, is Colorama Market in Colorama in DC, and they are it's a 2-person cooperative that's looking to bring on a 3rd person, and they're a market that had been shut down, and the family that is opening this cooperative lived in the neighborhood, loved love the market. The one teammate is a chef, and so they were able to get a equipment loan in order to get some of the materials they need to actually open that cooperative. And the cool thing is that the one woman that is part of the cooperative, her sister is in a worker co-op in New York City, and so she had idea of what a cooperative was, and that's why they got invested into building a cooperative. So just to say how important it is to stay connected, you never know who you might inspire to do things. So that is what non-extractive lending is. This is what you have access to when it comes to DC Solidarity Economy. And then just one thing that I want to say that's distinctive about Seed Commons and the way we do loans is that traditionally within lending, it's like, how do we lend money to make money? Like that's the point of lending, is a money-making thing. And it's like, how do we exploit the person that's taking the loan on, and how do we make money? And the values of Seed Commons is how do we use our money to be able to create more sustainable worker ownership across the United States. And because of that, going before the loan assembly within Seed Commons, you have to be able to pitch a values aligned loan. So not only are you showing your financials, which we support people in creating their financials, but also we have to show why this cooperative is values aligned, and like why is it actually going to combat racialized capitalism, and how is it actually profiting the planet and people. And so I think it's really cool. It's like, not the money doesn't go if it doesn't match its values. Okay.
Kristen, can I add one more thing?
Sure.
Just to highlight everything that Kristen said about the lending. I think talked about Seed Commons being values forward, but I also want to talk about how traditional lenders define risk. They'll look at your income personally. They'll look at your personal credit score. They'll look at, do you have 5 years of business history before we can lend anything to you, right? And actually with Seed Commons, the idea is we build a relationship, and it's a relationship that mitigates risk. So we can do startup loans. We can do loans that other lenders wouldn't engage because of the deep relationship building that we're doing. So I just want to highlight that piece because it's another way that folks get excluded from entrepreneurship or excluded from business ownership, is by those requirements of credit scores and personal guarantees and a lot of years of business history, which restricts it to people who have access to generational wealth or access to like money to start a business. So I just wanted to highlight that piece and pass it back to you.
Thank you. That actually transitions us well. If you all remember in Professor Hatcher's presentation, she talked about how cooperatives that are most successful are cooperatives that are deeply rooted in community and have anchoring institutions around them. And so the next piece we're going to talk about is actually how does BCI help to incubate cooperatives. So it's not only the access to capital, but it's also how do you build your cooperative. And I want to talk about our incubation cohort, who it's for, and how you have access to that, and then some other opportunities if this one does not match you. So we are kind of practicing a new practice this year where we're, instead of doing just individual technical assistance to people that are looking to build cooperatives, we're creating cohorts of people that are interested in either converting a business. So maybe you have a business and you're looking to retire and you want your workers to be able to own the business, or maybe you are a single owner and you actually want to be cooperative because it would benefit you as well. So you can do a co-op conversion, or you could be a person that has a team of 3 or more people and you have a business idea and you want to build a cooperative. Those are the 2 base of people that we're looking to support. And we're going to put you together with other people that are also looking to do that so that you can do peer-to-peer learning. So we'll do 2 cohorts this year. The first one in the spring and the second one in the fall. We'll be accepting 8 groups into each one of those. So potentially at the end of the year, we could have 16 new cooperatives in our ecosystem. And really the thing that's important is that you do want at least 3 or more people that are ready to like seriously do a business together. So if you don't have that yet, there might be some other opportunities that I'm going to speak on that are for you for your first step. And then maybe the first spring application process isn't for you, but then the next one would be. So, you know, hold on because there's some other opportunities for you if you don't quite yet have your 3 people. And the real reason around needing the 3 people is the governance process and just being able to spread the workload together is we just find that at least 3 people that makes a big difference for. And so actually what the cohort's going to provide. So it's going to be 6 sessions of teaching. So business model canvas, how do you do your pro forma? How do you do your governance, and all of the different processes to starting up a cooperative, which is not starting with your legal entity, which a lot of people think they should start with first. Well, so each of those will be teaching sessions throughout. So it'll be 6 teaching sessions. And then in between, there'll be coaching sessions. So you'll get to learn together within your cohort. And then each individual cooperative will have a coach that you then get to do the work from the session in between. So really trying to do a model of learning together and then getting individualized coaching. I think the application link is being dropped now. We also are going to be sending this out to everybody. The deadline for the first one is April 1st. All right, we can move on to the next opportunity and then I'll take questions around this. Okay, so let's say that maybe you don't have your team yet, or maybe you already have a cooperative and you're looking to talk more about DC Self. You want to learn more about how to be loan ready. Maybe you want to learn more about the BCI network because you're a cooperative and you want to join us, or maybe you just want some like sounding board conversation around an idea you have. We do intake and small business coaching ongoing. That link's going to be dropped in. I'm the first touch point you'll have around intake and then kind of dispatch to other people. So that is open to anybody. And then and also for people that maybe aren't local, if you wanted to get connected to your Seed Commons local peer, you could also message that message because it goes straight to my email and get connected to your local peer so we can support you with that. If you are local within the DMV, our sister organization, who's also a Seed Commons peer, Bread in Baltimore, is hosting a day-long jumpstart. So basically all the different tenets you need to jumpstart a cooperative. We are taking a contingency, a group of people. That group has been closed, but the opportunity to go to Bread, if you can get yourself there, is still open. And that's March 8th, and their link is being dropped in the chat as well. And then if this conversation was interesting to you and there are people that you are interested in building a cooperative with, or you want them to know more about the solidarity economy or more about cooperative development or more about what BCI offers, we're going to be hosting another one just like this on March 13th. Jennifer Bryant is going to also be giving more context and history to to Black co-ops within DC within that. So she'll be our guest for that day, and there'll be similar kind of format of the evening. So those are our invitations for next steps and how you can get connected. And Professor Hatchett did mention we do quarterly solidarity economy social hours. So since you signed up on here, you will be receiving our e-blasts when they come with those invitations. So you can also continue to mingle with other people within the DMV with a like mindset. So I'm going to stop talking and we'll move to the question slide. And I know there was a lot of chatting going on, so I'll also ask my colleagues if there's any direct things we want to answer first, and then invite other people to mute yourself and to continue the conversation.
Yes, we had a question early on in the evening from Sabahat. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. It was asking, are purchasing co-ops a good way to support Amazon boycotts?
That's a good question. Well, I think in general, so much of what like Amazon has done is Amazon, Uber. Also, Christine, if you like the image, there's a tote bag you can buy with the image on it. Um, Back to Amazon. I got distracted by the chat. So much of what Amazon and Uber have done is like artificially deflate prices or artificially like change expectations to make it harder for small businesses to compete. So in general, shopping local is a great option. And I think particularly finding cooperatives or small businesses is a great way to really like vote with your dollar, because in the US, money is speech. And so we have large corporations that are acting against the common good. I think a second piece I would say is if you have local purchasing cooperatives, it can often like there is Community Purchasing Alliance in Massachusetts and Ohio as well that all also came out of community organizing, like Professor Hatcher shared. And I think that they can often also expose you to like small businesses and vendors that you might not be exposed to either that do like amazing services. So like our purchasing cooperative does food service, janitorial, security, um, composting, landscaping, just a whole variety of services. So I would say yes, explore and also get connected to small businesses regardless, because they really help weave the fabric of our communities together.
Yeah, actually, that brings something that I wanted to mention that I just didn't before around conversions, and partly why we are really focusing on supporting small businesses into converting to worker co-ops. Because so often small businesses within our communities are not just about the business of what it sells, but also the culture, the history, the placemaking that these businesses have been. And in DC and in the DMV, a lot of times there's not enough capital as prices of rent have gone up or as the communities have shifted. And so needing like a capital infusion to be able to sustain the business, but also then how could the workers become part of the ownership? And so to me, that's also a benefit of worker ownership is it helps to create longevity within these community institutions because businesses aren't just about the purchasing, it's like the placemaking and the cultural history of businesses.
Can I ask a follow-up question about purchasing co-ops and their power? Have you ever seen like cities' procurement policies built around purchasing from co-ops versus having a procurement contract with Amazon or other large nameless, faceless corporates?
Yeah, that's another great question. So the idea of anchor institutions are really prevalent in sort of thinking about how do you organize an ecosystem. So one that's really famous is the Evergreen Cooperatives in Ohio, where they built a bunch of cooperatives connected to a hospital system. So providing like goods and services for the hospital system. I think in Wisconsin, they have like some preferential procurement policies for cooperatives. We can find that for the follow-up materials, but that is like a campaign that people go after. Also in Madison, they're doing cooperative incubation as a racial equity strategy. So they're investing city dollars into cooperative development. And then I think they have an accompanying cooperative preference in their procurement, the same way you would have for like certified minority business enterprise or like the sort of those designations. So we've seen it. I feel like we'll do a little more research to be able to share more about that.
Great, thank you so much.
Bianca did mention certified business minority business enterprises. So DC does have preferential procurement. So if you have a contract with DC government, some of the ways that they try to invest tax dollars resourcefully is through first sourcing, which requires 51% of your staff to be DC residents. And they also require 3% of the amount of your contract award to be spent with certified business enterprises. So if you get your business registered with DC government, you can then become a preferred vendor to provide various services. Kristen, do you want to talk about Flavorture since they are a co-op who is also a CBE?
Sure, although they're not yet a cooperative, but we're hoping. So what we do provide technical assistance and are working with Flavorture. Yeah, I'm not sure how much we want to say about that because that hasn't yet like actually transpired. But they're a really awesome team. Chef Pinky and Chef Mac came together, formed their business. They do catering and all kinds of really community-oriented ways, and also are the first Black-owned restaurant in Woodley Park. And so you can follow them at Flavorture and are moving into exploring worker ownership. Yeah.
I just want to take a quick second and make a pitch to y'all. There's been like lots of amazing excitement and engagement in the chat. So if you know a business owner like Kristen is saying who wants to retire, or you know a small business in your community that you want to remain in your community, or you have an idea coming to one of these, the Co-op 101s that we shared the link, or applying to be in the cohort, are really amazing resource opportunities. So even if it's not a good fit for you right now, I think we want to invite you all to be in the promotion place of helping share some of these resources with people that are in your network. And really just a plug for taking advantage of the intake and small business coaching or referral link that Kristen shared. We love connecting people and small businesses and cooperatives together. So really just a plug to take advantage of those resources. And if there are no other questions.
Oh, wait, sorry. We had one more
Okay.
question in the
Yeah.
stack. One was from Kim Wallace. Can an individual become part of the network? And then we had a question from Shane that said, how can we connect with each other? I'd like to learn more about other worker co-ops and share with each other.
Amazing. Okay, so can an individual be part of the network? So right now the network is for institutions, whether that's cooperatives or like kind of aligned businesses, or like part mutual aid groups that we're supporting. So right now, like the benefits of membership are for operational businesses. So if you're like, I'm one person and I have an idea, these sort of 101 and the cohorts and the bread jumpstart, like that's, and the coaching session are really the right place if you have an idea. If your business or institution you're connected to is like operational already and you want to be more connected, then the organization can become a member. So right now we don't have individual memberships in the network, but there are plenty of ways like to connect as an individual, like the social hours that we talked about, and getting like onto our listserv. And we're also looking to build some teams of folks that support cooperatives. So if you're like, I have skills and time and want to like volunteer my time, we can also do that. The second piece was like, how can we connect with each other, and wanting to learn more. Shane, I think I put some of the New York City related like networks and organizations in the chat. And you can always follow us on Instagram, but we post a lot and we're sharing about events and reposting the events of organizations kind of across the country that are doing this work. Another New Economy Coalition does a roundup So we are a part of two national networks, New Economy Coalition and U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops convenes a bunch of tables. For cooperatives in different sectors, peer groups. So that's one way you can get connected to people in like your industry across the country. And then New Economy Coalition sends out a regular roundup of like cool other projects, but broader than worker co-ops, also land projects and finance projects. So those are two, like I would get connected to the two nationals because they'll refer you to what's happening in your region. So I think that's all the questions. Actually, Amanda asked about how ready groups might have to be. Do you feel like your question got answered? If Amanda's still here. I don't think we have Amanda anymore. Perfect. So I think BCI team, if you agree, I think we are getting ready to close out for the day, and we really just want to like thank you all. And you will get a follow-up email that has all these links and resources as well as the slide decks. So I think we will say goodnight to y'all. And just thank you all for being so engaged and like really excited to have you all with us today.